He had his theory, and he didn't have any way of proving it because, I mean, how do you prove something like that? Until this family showed up at his doorstep.
Can biological science be rewritten by ideology? Dr. Miriam Grossman's fearless testimony took on woke gender theories with facts and evidence, exposing their flaws and shaking the debate to its core. Get ready for arguments that shattered the narrative instantly. Sex assigned at birth misrepresentation. Dr. Grossman began by debunking the term sex assigned at birth, asserting that sex is determined at conception via chromosomes XX for females and XY for males. She explained that doctors merely recognize sex, not assign it.
Thank you for the opportunity to address you. The phrase, sex assigned at birth. Sex is not assigned at birth. Sex is established at conception, and it's recognized at birth, if not earlier. Dr. McNamara claims that her views are science-based, but to claim that sex is assigned at birth is without any scientific basis whatsoever. Its language misleads people, especially children, into thinking that male and female are arbitrary designations and can change.
Countering the idea that sex is subjective or changeable. This clear scientific clarification stunned her audience. Is this confusion leading society astray? Evidence-based claims and risk of suicide. Dr. Grossman challenged the claim that withholding medical interventions for transgender youth leads to increased suicides. She cited global examples, including nations like Finland and Sweden, that restricted such treatments without any rise in suicides.
Well, a growing number of countries have effectively banned the care to which she's referring. And thank God there's been no wave of suicides or other mental health catastrophes. 3 years ago, Finland placed strict limitations on medical interventions for minors.
Her argument raised questions about the validity of so-called life-saving interventions, leaving critics scrambling for counter-arguments.
3 years ago, Finland placed strict limitations on medical interventions for minors.
Finland's policy changes. Finland reviewed the evidence and decided to impose strict limits on treatments like puberty blockers for minors. The risks, they found, outweighed the benefits. Dr. Grossman highlights this, asking why other nations ignore Finland's data.
3 years ago, Finland placed strict limitations on medical interventions for minors.
Shouldn't we prioritize safety over ideology when treating vulnerable children? Sweden's policy and investigation. Sweden's decision to restrict interventions followed a chilling incident involving a 14-year-old girl who suffered severe bone damage from puberty blockers. Dr. Grossman shared how Swedish authorities launched a rigorous investigation and deemed the risks too high for minors.
Sweden did the same thing after a 14-year-old girl was found to have osteoporosis and spinal fractures from puberty blockers. An investigation concluded, quote, the risks of anti-puberty and hormone treatment for those under 18 currently outweigh the possible benefits.
The audience was left pondering how such cases could be ignored elsewhere.
After a 14-year-old girl was found to have osteoporosis and spinal fractures from puberty blockers.
The UK's review. The UK conducted an extensive review and found the evidence supporting transgender treatments for minors to be very low. As a result, they implemented severe restrictions. Dr. Grossman commends this move, highlighting the importance of robust, evidence-based care.
The UK conducted a review and called the evidence very low. They've also placed severe restrictions on the care that Dr. McNamara calls life-saving.
Why should children be subjected to experimental medicine without solid proof? Norway's analysis. Norway, too, found insufficient evidence to support puberty blockers and hormones for minors. Dr. Grossman emphasized how this cautious approach aligned with other progressive nations. The pattern became undeniable. Countries with strong medical ethics are increasingly rejecting these interventions as unsafe and lacking long-term benefits.
Norway also analyzed the data and has made similar changes in policy.
France's National Academy of Medicine warning. France's National Academy of Medicine added its voice of caution, warning about irreversible side effects of these treatments on vulnerable children.
The National Academy of Medicine in France warned, quote, Great medical caution must be taken in children and adolescents, given the vulnerability of this population and the many undesirable, even serious, complications the therapies cause.
Dr. Grossman's account of France's stance highlighted how nations are prioritizing care and caution over ideology. The audience couldn't help but ask, why isn't this a global standard? Statements from doctors in New Zealand and Australia. Medical experts in New Zealand and Australia echoed similar concerns, Dr. Grossman explained. These professionals emphasized that premature interventions for minors lack sufficient evidence.
Doctors in New Zealand and Australia have published similar statements. Is Dr. McNamara suggesting that all these countries are rejecting evidence-based treatment and placing their kids at risk of suicide?
Her inclusion of their warnings painted a global picture of doubt over current practices, challenging claims of a universal medical consensus. Dr. McNamara's implication about other countries. Dr. Grossman dismantled Dr. McNamara's implication that countries like Finland and Sweden are endangering transgender youth by restricting interventions. Quoting Finnish expert Dr. Riitta Kaltiala, she called such claims purposeful disinformation that creates unnecessary fear among parents and children. The room was left questioning the motivations behind these narratives.
Finland's gender expert Dr. Riitta Kaltiala said, quote, "It's purposeful disinformation, the spreading of which is irresponsible."
Needs of children versus medical interventions. Children, Dr. Grossman argued, need psychotherapy, not invasive treatments that disrupt natural development. She described harmful practices like halting menstruation and permanently altering voices in young teens. Her vivid examples made the audience question the necessity and ethics of such drastic measures for minors.
The kids don't need their development interrupted. The girls don't need their periods stopped and their voices lowered. And the boys don't need to grow breasts. What they need is psychotherapy.
No medical standard for care. Contrary to Dr. McNamara's claims, Dr. Grossman pointed out that there is no medical consensus on transgender youth treatments. The field is deeply divided, and ongoing debates among experts highlight the experimental nature of these interventions. The lack of a standard left her audience questioning their safety.
She insists that her position, only hers, represents standard medical care. What she doesn't want you to know is that there is no standard. There's a debate.
Prominent experts' opposition. Veteran clinicians like Stephen Levine and Kenneth Zucker oppose transgender interventions for minors, citing substantial risks and a lack of long-term benefits. Dr. Grossman highlights their ignored voices. Shouldn't decades of clinical experience hold weight in shaping policies for such critical treatments?
As Stephen Levine, Kenneth Zucker, Paul McHugh, and James Cantor, among others, these doctors are giants in the field. They have been treating transgender patients and gathering data and publishing papers about them, and I mean no disrespect here, but since before Dr. McNamara was born.
Lack of long-term evidence. There is no credible evidence supporting long-term benefits of these treatments, Dr. Grossman stated, but there is substantial proof of harm. Irreversible effects and severe complications demand caution, not haste. Her arguments made it impossible to ignore the gaps in evidence backing these practices for minors.
The point is that those veteran clinicians and others who have wisdom and experience are ignored because they disagree with the current narrative. They're against medical interventions for the same reason those 7 countries are. There is no evidence of long-term benefit, but there is evidence of harm.
Whistleblower Jamie Reed's statement. Dr. Grossman concluded with a powerful anecdote from whistleblower Jamie Reed, who exposed reckless practices at a gender clinic. Reed's warning that treatments were building the plane while flying it underscored their experimental nature. This eye-opening account left the audience questioning the ethics of such interventions. Dr. Miriam Grossman's testimony dismantled woke gender ideology with science, evidence, and ethics. She called for caution over experimentation, challenging narratives that ignore real risks.
She said that doctors at that clinic said, "We are building the plane while we are flying it. We are building the plane while we are flying it." That's how they described the treatment at their gender clinic.
If her arguments made you think, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more critical discussions on today's most pressing issues.